Hi, dear friends of Philipp von Rosen Gallery. After a longer break, I'm coming back to you with one of my short videos from the series of so-called in-depth views about individual works of art. Today, I want to talk about Silke Albrecht's diptych Processes number 3 that you see behind me. Silke is part of my gallery's roster since 2019 and her exhibition Shattered Earth. And we are planning to show her next solo show in November, parallel to one of the so-called new position booths at Art Cologne. Let's keep fingers crossed that all this will be possible to take place. Silke was born in the mid-80s and she studied art first at the Academy in Münster, and then she graduated in Andreas Gursky's class at the Academy in Düsseldorf. Let me now come to the work Processes 3, and first of all to the plain facts. It is a work consisting of 2 panels, each measuring 2 meters in height and 1 meter in width. And these panels are hanging at a small distance from each other, which gives the impression of a square divided in 2. On the left side of the diptych, we see abstract black and white and grayish formations that have been applied in lacquer on linen, plus a closed meshed steel grid that crosses the panel vertically on the right side of the left side panel of the diptych. The right side of the diptych, on the other hand, consists of a copper plate on which have been applied different lacquers. The copper plate itself has been laid down on a frame and has been, after it has been treated with the lacquer, has been covered with a protective plexiglass plate, which is fastened by copper nails. It is not only the title of the work Processes number 3 that encourages the viewer to engage with the respective process of creation of the 2 panels, but also the view of the images themselves. Let first the description of what we see become the priority. As far as regards the description, let me start with the left panel. I had put the word images in quotation marks because exactly that, an image, we do not have here, although the work features color material on canvas, and thus it is undoubtedly a painting. However, it is not an image of something, but a color formation, not abstraction, because there is no previous basis from which abstraction would have been made, nor is it a hard edge painting or geometric abstraction, because it is just flowing, unbounded and indefinable forms. These forms were created by Silke Albrecht on a horizontally lying, transparently primed, so that we don't see a color where lacquer hasn't been poured, transparently primed canvas with black and white lacquers. You see them here. Differently diluted with water or undiluted, so they react differently to the movements that have been applied to the canvas after the color or the lacquer material has been tipped and poured. Sometimes the material and the lacquer has been poured with a time interval so that some zones already had dried, and so the color had to go around, and in some cases the colors were mixed. What I haven't mentioned up to now is that the steel grid had been fixed by cans, and we see the traces here and here and here, so that it didn't move. It is now held by the color material. And the flowing lacquers, the mixing lacquers, were flowing around these cans. Also, the humidity in the lacquer created rust, which was then taken by the lacquer, flowing lacquer, and is to be found in these places. So there is pigment coming from the rust to be seen as well. While the expanded metal is an industrial product with precisely defined dimensions and very precise alignment, the poured paint is the product of a very subjective pouring process by the artist. Thus the subjective performance performed by Silke Albrecht which includes coincidences and is not controllable in every respect, is contrasted with the objet trouvé from industry, which is a mass product whose appearances are predetermined by the market and its needs. On the right panel, Albrecht has again worked with different lacquers that had been poured on the horizontally lying copper panel. And there are some parts where the color or the lacquers are still existing, and they turned the copper into this greenish surface. And there are other parts here, the bluish regions, where the lacquer dried and burst open and did not connect very well to the copper panel, and therefore was brushed off. And in these parts we have these craquelé structures that remind us of ice flowers or the structures of leaves, the veins of leaves. After the completion of the pouring processes, drying and brushing away processes, Albrecht was covering, as I said before, the copper panel with a plexiglass plane. And that was not only meant as a protection against possible scratches or additional reactions, chemical reactions, but mainly in order to connect the viewer, us as a viewer, with the surface, with the mirroring surface. So what we have to do is we have to do a kind of performative act, similar to the one Albrecht was performing when she poured the lacquers, in order to see the right panel as good and as closely as possible. So we are somewhat merged with the work. It can be concluded that the different chemical process took place on each of the two panels, which is visible and comprehensible as such, like a trace of the artist's actions, which means her physical performance in pouring the lacquers on the different panels. So we are talking about two different processes, on the left and on the right, which stand next to each other. They are not connected by, for instance, colors that run over the edges and create a proximity between the two panels. So it's rather a relationship of the two processes to each other and their dissimilarity that triggers respective processes of thought and association in the viewer. So if we see the two panels, we compare, we start to see differences, and we delve into the different two processes. So on the one hand, we are animated to comparative seeing, which allows us to comprehend and experience the performative and even physical process in the studio that led to the creation of the two panels in the first place. Our comparative seeing as a form of our work performance, as I said before, we need to move around to understand especially the right-hand panel. So our comparative seeing creates a context, a relationship between the two panels, and thus establishes their connection. On the other hand, as art historians or connoisseurs, one can of course think of different other predecessors to Silke Albrecht. One is obviously Jackson Pollock, and you all know this famous photograph of him seeing with the bucket working on one of his canvases. And another predecessor could be Andy Warhol with his oxidation paintings, in which oxidation processes were activated by urine applied, probably pissed, onto canvases that had been prepared with copper paint. In contrast to Warhol, however, the processes in Silke Albrecht's paintings are more concentrated and controlled. The pours are not as erratic as the splashes in Warhol's paintings. Likewise, a comparison of Albrecht's processes with the Rorschach tests, which we know from psychology and also with the corresponding Warhol paintings, is obvious. Here too, however, the devil is in the details. For in Albrecht's case, there is precisely no folding symmetry, not even in the faintest sense. On the contrary, the difference between the processes and the resulting formations is much more in the foreground and leads to some sorts of associations. But what kind of associations are these? Probably those that we also know when we lie down on a lawn and look into the clouds, or when we read and interpret tea leaves. Especially the lacquers on the left panel recall to me at least butterfly or angel wings. We are thus involved by the formations in a search game which oscillates between abstraction, because there's only abstract forms, and figuration, because there are the angel wings. And at the same time, this makes clear to us again and again that the search for pictorial meaning is tantamount to a narrowing of our perception, a narrowing that does not concede sufficient importance to the processual character of the painting. And processual are, of course, also numerous circumstances in the real world, which are thus given a metaphor in Albrecht's diptych, Processes number 3. One processual aspect from the real world, which one can think of especially in the left half of the diptych, and especially I'm thinking about this zone, is, for example, that which is summarized with the term entropy and described as the second law of thermodynamics. Robert Smithson had described in 1967 as a visualizing example a boy who runs in a sandbox which is filled on the left with white sand and on the right, precisely separated, with black sand. And the boy runs in the clockwise sense in a circle and mixes the two sand parts and cannot rescind this process by working further rounds against the clockwise sense. Comparable to that example, the white and black color zones in Albrecht's paintings cannot be separated anymore, but also processes which take place between different people and or objects and are manifested in the relationships between these people and or objects could be associated here. Well, the process to fight COVID-19 is still in full swing. At some point you will be allowed to visit galleries even in Cologne again, and we look very much forward to seeing you here in front of the works. Until then, however, I hope you appreciate occasional digital messages from me, and I also hope that you will get in touch if you have questions. Oh, and by the way, one possible question can quickly be answered. Yes, Processes 3 is available. Please contact the gallery for the price. Bye-bye.